The sun had barely risen, casting a soft glow over the quiet suburban street, when flashing lights appeared in her rearview mirror. A police cruiser had pulled her over. Mariah, a black woman in a crisp business suit, felt a familiar knot of tension tighten in her chest. Her two children, an 8-year-old girl and a 10-year-old boy, sat silently in the back seat, eyes wide with confusion and fear. The small car suddenly felt like a cage, their world shrinking to the space between them, and the uniformed figures approaching. "License and registration," one officer barked, his tone sharp and condescending. Mariah's hands remained steady on the wheel, her voice calm but firm. "Everything is in order. May I ask the reason for this stop?" The officer's gaze flicked to her children, then back to her, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Lady, we can make this very simple. $500 cash. Pay us, and maybe we won't tow your car. Don't want trouble, do we?" Mariah's heart pounded, not with fear, but with indignation. She inhaled slowly, keeping her posture straight, eyes locked on the officer. "I'd rather be arrested," she said, her voice steady, unwavering, even as her children shifted nervously behind her. The officer laughed, a low, derisive sound. "Your choice, ma'am. Your request is an order," he said, signaling his partner. In a heartbeat, handcuffs were snapped onto her wrists. The children's faces went pale as officers gently but firmly guided them out of the car, placing them in the back seat of another patrol vehicle. As they drove toward the police station, Mariah's mind raced, not with panic but with strategy. Every word, every action had to be precise. She knew the system, the law, the procedures, but none of that mattered to these men, blinded by prejudice. They only saw a black woman, a target, someone they could intimidate without consequence. Yet beneath the calm exterior and composed demeanor, a different truth existed. Mariah wasn't just any citizen. She was one of the most respected attorneys in the country, a woman whose career had been built on intellect, integrity, and unwavering commitment to justice. And soon, the very men who thought they held power over her would discover the shocking reality, one that would leave them stunned and force everyone watching to question what they thought they knew about authority, respect, and prejudice. If you were in her shoes, where would you be from? Tell us your city or state in the comments. We'd love to see how far this story reaches. The moment the handcuffs clicked around Monique's wrists, a cold surge of disbelief washed over her. She had anticipated prejudice, perhaps even unfair treatment, but never imagined it would escalate so quickly in broad daylight, right in front of her children. Her daughter's eyes were wide with panic, her small hands clutching the seat, while her son's brows furrowed, gripping the edge of the car door as if he could anchor himself to safety. Every instinct screamed to protect them, to explain, to make this nightmare disappear. But she knew that calm composure would serve them best. Confusion tangled with anger. How could this be happening? Her car was perfectly legal, her documents up to date, yet the men in uniform had already decided who she was before even glancing at her license. She felt the familiar sting of racial bias, sharp and immediate, the kind that had shadowed her every step since she first stepped onto a college campus as a young black woman chasing a law degree. And now here it was again, another authority figure assuming control over her life, her family, her dignity, without a second thought. Her mind raced, calculating the next steps, even as her heart thumped in her chest. She could see the police officers' expressions, the casual smirk of superiority, the way they measured her with eyes that didn't look for the truth but for leverage. And yet, Monique refused to break. She straightened her shoulders in the cramped space of the patrol car, lifting her chin, projecting a quiet authority she had cultivated over years of courtroom battles and legal negotiations. Fear for her children mingled with a simmering indignation. What would happen if this escalated? Could she trust that the system would recognize her rights, her innocence, her competence? But alongside that fear, there was clarity, a fierce, unyielding understanding that submission would only validate their assumptions. She would not bend, she would not beg, she would not allow her children to internalize a lesson in powerlessness at the hands of those blinded by prejudice. The sounds of the city outside seemed distant, replaced by the echoing uncertainty of the vehicle's interior. Her children whispered questions she could not yet answer. Yet, even as tension tightened in her chest, she felt the familiar resolve that had carried her through years of challenges. They had underestimated her, they had misjudged her entirely. And while the officers held the temporary advantage, Monique knew deep in the marrow of her bones that this moment, fraught as it was with fear, confusion, and indignation, was not the end of her story. Her eyes met the rearview mirror as she caught a glimpse of her own reflection. A woman forced into a corner yet unbroken. She inhaled, steadying herself, silently promising her children that justice, patience, and courage would prevail. This was the first battle, and Monique was already preparing for the war ahead. The officer leaned closer, his face a mask of false authority, as if proximity alone could intimidate Monique. "Listen, ma'am," he said, voice low and slightly taunting. "We don't need to make this complicated. You don't want your car towed, right?" His eyes flicked to her children, a subtle attempt at pressure that made Monique's jaw tighten. The underlying message was clear: compliance or consequences. Her hands remained cuffed but steady, fingers lightly tapping the leather seat as she measured her response. She could feel the children's anxious gazes from the back seat, silent questions hanging in the air. The officer continued, a smirk curling his lips. "Let's make this easy. $500. You hand it over and maybe you get to drive away without a problem. Don't want to make trouble for yourself or your kids." The word stung like a blade, an explicit attempt at corruption cloaked in feigned civility. The assumption was obvious. She was a black woman in a well-kept car, and therefore an easy target. They didn't know her, didn't care to know her. All that mattered was her appearance, her skin, and their perception of what it meant. Prejudice, bold and unapologetic, wielded as power. Monique met his gaze, unflinching. Her mind raced, sifting through legal knowledge, ethical obligations, and instinctual protective strategies for her children. She could comply, risk humiliation, or resist, and she chose resistance. Calmly, deliberately, she said, "I'd rather be arrested." Her voice carried both certainty and challenge, a quiet thunder that made the officer pause for the briefest moment. "Your choice, ma'am. Your request is an order," he replied with a derisive laugh, snapping his fingers at his partner. Monique's pulse quickened as the reality sank in. They were proceeding undeterred by logic, law, or morality. The children's small hands clutched at each other, silent anchors amidst the storm of injustice. The officer's smugness, born from centuries of unchallenged assumptions, met Monique's quiet authority, a battle not yet visible to the crowd of onlookers beginning to gather. The tension was palpable. Every whispered instruction, every measured gesture was a demonstration of power, misused, unearned, and unjust. Monique's mind was already turning, considering every possible avenue, the legal implications, the next phone call, the leverage of knowledge they could never anticipate. The officers saw only a black woman in handcuffs. She saw the moment for what it was, a test of patience, dignity, and strategic thinking. Even under threat and humiliation, Monique's composure never wavered. The officer believed he had the upper hand, but in that moment he underestimated more than her resolve. He underestimated her understanding of the law, her influence, and the storm that was quietly gathering beneath her calm exterior. This encounter, charged with bias and corruption, was about to shift dramatically, and Monique was ready. Monique's story began in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of a bustling American city, where opportunities were scarce, but determination ran deep. From an early age, she understood the weight of her identity. A black girl navigating a world that often judged her before she spoke, measured her by the color of her skin, rather than the content of her character. Her parents, hard-working and resilient, instilled in her the belief that education was not just a path to success, but a shield against a society eager to define her limits. School was a battlefield of expectations. Teachers sometimes underestimated her intelligence, classmates occasionally ridiculed her accent or style, and subtle racial bias lurked in countless interactions she barely comprehended at the time. Yet, each slight became a brick in the foundation of her resilience. She studied late into the night under the dim glow of a desk lamp, juggling part-time jobs to contribute to the household, and learning early the value of persistence and focus. Her mind thrived on challenge. She excelled in debate club, excelled in standardized tests, and stood out not for bravado, but for a quiet, unwavering determination. Despite the financial hardships, Monique's parents encouraged her to dream beyond the neighborhood. College applications were daunting, both financially and emotionally, but she refused to accept that circumstances would dictate her future. With scholarships and relentless drive, she earned a place at a reputable law school, a milestone that felt both monumental and surreal. For the first time, she walked through halls where few looked like her, where her voice had to carry even further to be heard, and where every small victory was hard-earned. Racial bias did not disappear within the ivy-clad walls of academia. Professors occasionally questioned her potential, peers sometimes underestimated her contributions, and she quickly learned that the law was as much about strategy and resilience as about intellect. But Monique persisted. She forged mentors, absorbed every lesson, and began building the foundations of a career that would one day protect the powerless and challenge injustice in every form. Her path was not only about professional achievement, it was also deeply personal. Monique experienced the complexities of life, balancing relationships, facing heartbreak, and eventually raising 2 children on her own. Each challenge, from systemic bias to personal struggle, had fortified her spirit. Every moment of doubt, every closed door, had shaped a woman capable of facing humiliation and injustice with dignity, foresight, and strategic intelligence. By the time she became a practicing attorney, Monique was not just skilled, she was formidable. Her intellect, resilience, and empathy combined to create a professional who could navigate courts, negotiate settlements, and stand as a pillar of justice. And yet, despite all her accomplishments, the world outside her courtroom often failed to recognize the quiet authority she wielded, a truth that would soon be revealed in the most dramatic and unexpected way. Monique's current life reflected a careful balance of professional achievement and personal resilience. As one of the most respected attorneys in her state, she had built a career quietly, yet with undeniable impact. Her work was meticulous, strategic, and often behind the scenes. Victories were not always broadcast, but they reshaped lives, influenced policies, and corrected injustices that might have gone unnoticed. Colleagues spoke of her intellect in hushed tones. Clients trusted her with their most critical cases, and yet to the casual observer, she remained just another professional, navigating the city streets in her tailored suits and polished demeanor. Her daily routine was a careful choreography. Early mornings began with preparing her children for school, ensuring they felt secure and loved despite the demands of her career. The commute to the office was a time of reflection, mentally reviewing cases, anticipating challenges, and preparing strategies. Her legal work spanned civil rights cases, high-profile corporate negotiations, and advocacy for marginalized communities, a spectrum that demanded both sharp intellect and emotional fortitude. Despite the weight of responsibility, Monique moved with calm precision, aware that every decision carried consequences, not just for her clients, but for the integrity of the law itself. What distinguished Monique was not simply her legal acumen, but her quiet authority. She commanded respect through competence, not intimidation. Her courtroom presence was poised and confident. Her voice carried weight even in the most tense and high-stakes situations. Clients often left her office reassured, unaware of the layers of preparation, the late nights, and the careful navigation of legal complexities that allowed her to protect them. To the world, Monique's accomplishments might have seemed discreet, understated, but those who knew her work understood the magnitude of her influence. Her reputation was built on more than intelligence. It was founded on integrity and persistence. She had faced bias, prejudice, and skepticism countless times, by peers, opponents, and occasionally the very system she served. Yet Monique never allowed those obstacles to dictate her actions. Each challenge strengthened her resolve, shaping her into a professional capable of facing injustice with both courage and strategy. Her authority was earned quietly, through consistent demonstration of skill, judgment, and moral clarity. And yet, despite her achievements, Monique lived in a world that often reduced her to assumptions based on appearance. She navigated this tension daily, aware that her true power, knowledge, influence, and mastery of the law was invisible to those quick to judge. It was a reality she had learned to accept, to work within, and ultimately to challenge when necessary. Little did the world know that this quiet, controlled authority would soon collide with prejudice in the most public, dramatic, and unforgettable way, a moment where everything observers thought they understood about power, race, and respect would be turned upside down. Even as the handcuffs clinked lightly around her wrists, Monique's demeanor remained unshaken. To the casual observer, she might have seemed merely calm, compliant even, but those who knew how to read people could see the subtle markers of authority in every motion. She held her head high, shoulders squared, breathing measured and deliberate. Each gesture, however small, conveyed a sense of control that contradicted the immediate circumstances. The officers, confident in their assumed superiority, failed to notice the quiet intelligence radiating from her eyes, the analytical precision behind each glance. Her language, too, betrayed a depth of understanding that went unnoticed by those blinded by bias. When she responded to the officer's commands, her words were precise, careful, and devoid of unnecessary emotion, yet imbued with a clarity that suggested not compliance, but calculated engagement. "I understand your instructions," she said, voice steady, "and I will cooperate as required by law." There was no pleading, no hesitation, only the subtle assertion that she understood the rules better than they realized. Every phrase was a measured signal, a silent warning that the person before them was not ordinary, and that every misstep could have consequences they had not considered. Even in the cramped interior of the patrol car, Monique's posture communicated resilience. Her back was straight against the seat, her hands placed deliberately in front of her, projecting calm authority. She shifted only when necessary, each movement intentional, like a seasoned strategist maneuvering within limited space. To the officers, it might have appeared as patience or quiet resignation, but in truth it was the embodiment of control. Her composure was a language of its own, one that spoke louder than words, hinting at competence that extended far beyond the superficial assumptions of those surrounding her. Her confidence was subtle, but unmistakable. She did not challenge the officers directly, yet every decision, every glance, every breath projected a knowledge of the system and her place within it. In the briefest of moments, she demonstrated awareness of legal protocols, of how to navigate confrontations without escalating them unnecessarily. She was a professional who had mastered both the letter of the law and the subtleties of human behavior. This quiet mastery, invisible to the uninformed eye, set the stage for a revelation that would soon leave everyone astonished. Even the children sensed it, though they could not articulate why. There was a calm certainty about their mother that steadied their own fear. Her aura of competence extended outward, shielding them in ways the officers could not comprehend. Each subtle cue, posture, tone, movement, was a breadcrumb trail, a hint of the authority and intellect hidden beneath the immediate tension. In that moment, Monique's true power was not yet visible, but it was unmistakably present, quietly asserting itself through every controlled action. The officers believed they held the advantage, but the first hints of her authority foreshadowed a reality they would soon confront, a truth that would not only upend their assumptions, but force everyone watching to reconsider the meaning of respect, competence, and justice. The street had begun to fill with curious onlookers, their whispers rising like a low hum in the morning air. Monique's children clung to her side as officers circled the car, their demeanor shifting between faux politeness and barely concealed arrogance. "Lady, we've been patient," one officer said, leaning against the hood of the vehicle. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." His eyes lingered on her wallet and the neatly organized papers on the passenger seat, implying that compliance would spare her public embarrassment. Monique felt a familiar surge of indignation. The implication was clear. Her appearance, her skin, and the very fact that she had dared to drive her children without yielding to their expectations made her a target. "I will not pay a bribe," she said firmly, her voice echoing slightly in the small crowd now gathering. "Everything is in order. You are harassing me without cause." The officer's smirk widened, as though her defiance were merely an inconvenience. "Harassment? No, ma'am. Let's call it friendly persuasion. You hand over 500, and you can continue on your way." The words dripped with patronization, a thinly veiled attempt to assert dominance and humiliate her in front of witnesses. Monique's children watched, their small bodies tense, unsure of what this public display meant. She reached a hand to her daughter's shoulder and whispered reassurance, even as her own heart raced. The tension in the air was palpable, the crowd straining to catch every word, their reactions a mixture of curiosity, judgment, and sympathy. Phones were raised to record, but Monique didn't flinch. Every action and word was deliberate. She understood the spectacle unfolding, the social dynamics at play, and the dangerous assumptions the officers were making. The officer's partner stepped closer, tapping the car door, voice low but forceful. "Ma'am, this could end quickly if you just cooperate. Why make this harder than it has to be?" Monique shook her head slowly, a deliberate refusal to yield. "I'd rather face your arrest than compromise my integrity," she replied. The calm authority in her tone contrasted sharply with the officer's aggressive posturing, creating a tension that seemed to hang in the air like an unbroken thread. The whispers from the crowd grew louder, some questioning the officers, others murmuring support for Monique. Still, the public setting offered no immediate relief. Humiliation had already begun. Yet Monique's composure never wavered. Each challenge, each attempt at coercion, she met with clarity, poise, and quiet defiance. Even as the officers exchanged frustrated glances, it became increasingly clear that their attempts at domination were futile against a woman whose strength, knowledge, and authority extended far beyond their assumptions. Every gesture, every glance, every carefully measured word was a statement. Monique would not be reduced to a stereotype, nor would her children witness her submission to injustice. And while the officers may have believed they held control, the truth was quietly emerging. Monique's integrity and intelligence would soon turn this moment of humiliation into a lesson in accountability that neither they nor the public would forget. The small crowd that had gathered on the sidewalk grew thicker, drawn by the flashing lights, raised voices, and the unmistakable tension in the air. People stopped their morning routines, phones in hand, trying to capture a piece of the unfolding drama. Some whispered, others stared openly, their expressions ranging from curiosity to judgment. "Why is she being arrested?" one passerby murmured, uncertainty laced with skepticism. Another shook their head, muttering, "She must have done something wrong, and look at the way the police are handling her." The whispers and murmurs acted like a current, spreading through the onlookers, each person feeding off the assumptions of the next. No one knew the truth, and yet everyone felt entitled to an opinion. The sight of a well-dressed black woman, handcuffed and standing beside two frightened children, was enough to ignite their assumptions. Some nodded in agreement with the officers, believing they were witnessing legitimate law enforcement. Others fidgeted uncomfortably, sensing injustice, but unsure how to intervene or express it. Children on the sidewalk mirrored the tension, their parents' hushed tones shaping a perception of authority and guilt. Phones recorded every angle, every expression, every movement, moments that could later be shared, analyzed, or misinterpreted. Monique's composure stood in stark contrast to the crowd's noise. She noticed the sideways glances, the half-whispered judgments, and the fleeting moments of empathy. The crowd did not see her as a mother, a professional, or a citizen being targeted. They saw only what their biases allowed, a black woman in trouble. Some members of the crowd, however, could not ignore the courage in her stance. Her calm, unwavering gaze, her deliberate posture, the protective gestures toward her children, these subtle details planted seeds of doubt in the minds of a few observers. They began to question what they had assumed, noticing inconsistencies in the officer's story, the lack of obvious wrongdoing, and the evident dignity of the woman in their midst. Yet judgment was easier than understanding. Many continued to speculate, their eyes flicking between Monique and the officers, as if searching for confirmation of guilt. "She's probably hiding something," one whispered. "I bet she's lying," another said, voice low but firm. The crowd became a mirror of society's broader prejudices, quick to condemn, slow to understand, eager to narrate a story without facts. Amidst the scrutiny, Monique's awareness of her audience sharpened. She knew the significance of their gaze, the weight of their judgments, and the power of perception. Every controlled movement, every calm word was a silent challenge to the assumptions swirling around her. While the eyes of strangers might judge, she understood that truth and authority were not defined by appearances. They were defined by knowledge, integrity, and action. And in this moment, the first hints of that authority, barely visible to the crowd, began to quietly shift the narrative, foreshadowing the revelation that would soon leave everyone astounded. Inside the patrol car, the world outside seemed to blur, reduced to flashing lights, murmuring voices, and the distant hum of traffic. Monique felt a storm of emotions rising within her, anger, frustration, and indignation, but she allowed none of it to escape in uncontrolled bursts. Every part of her being demanded to react, to argue, to assert the truth, yet years of experience had taught her the value of patience and strategic composure. This was not merely a test of endurance, it was a demonstration of control, of knowing when silence spoke louder than words. Her thoughts returned to her children, seated quietly beside her. Their small faces mirrored anxiety and fear, reflecting the unfairness of the moment. Monique inhaled deeply, focusing on their presence as a grounding force. Any display of unchecked emotion could escalate the situation, put them at risk, or reinforce the officer's assumptions. She reminded herself that calmness was not weakness, it was power. She had learned through countless personal and professional battles that dignity under pressure could be more formidable than any outburst. Anger simmered just beneath the surface. The injustice of being judged, harassed, and humiliated because of the color of her skin ignited a fire in her chest. It was a familiar fire, one that had accompanied her since childhood, through every biased glance, dismissive comment, and systemic obstacle. Yet now she converted that indignation into focus, transforming the energy of frustration into a precise awareness of her surroundings and the people she was dealing with. Every word spoken, every movement became intentional, measured, and deliberate. Monique's mind worked quickly, mapping out possibilities, anticipating reactions, and preparing contingencies. She understood the fragility of perception, the danger of assumptions, and the subtle leverage that knowledge provided. The officers saw only a black woman in cuffs. They did not yet see the intellect, the authority, or the capacity for influence hidden beneath the surface. And that was an advantage she held firmly, silently, like a weapon of patience and self-control. Her indignation was tempered by reflection. She considered the broader implications, not just for herself, but for others who might face similar prejudice without the experience, resources, or awareness she possessed. She felt the weight of systemic injustice, the echoes of past discrimination, and the urgency of demonstrating that dignity and authority could withstand even the most public and demeaning challenges. Breathing slowly, Monique allowed a sense of calm to settle over her. Patience, self-control, and measured composure were her allies. The world might try to define her by assumptions, bias, or fear, but she would not allow it. Every heartbeat, every glance at her children, every silent acknowledgement of her own strength reinforced the knowledge that she was not powerless. She was aware, prepared, and unbroken. In that moment of quiet reflection, Monique understood the truth. Justice, patience, and integrity would outlast prejudice, and the moment for revelation was drawing near. Monique's current predicament was not an isolated incident. It was part of a broader pattern woven into the fabric of American society. For centuries, Black Americans had faced systemic prejudice, assumptions of guilt, and the weight of stereotypes that painted them as threats, criminals, or less capable citizens. From the earliest laws that codified inequality to the modern practices of law enforcement and social judgment, racial bias had persisted in both overt and subtle forms, influencing perceptions and interactions in every layer of public life. The historical echoes of segregation, discrimination, and limited access to education and resources were still felt in the present day. Communities like the one Monique grew up in had long struggled to assert equality in a society that often denied opportunity based on skin color. Even when individuals achieved remarkable success, their accomplishments could be overlooked or dismissed by a culture conditioned to undervalue their contributions. These social constructs were not just relics of the past, they were alive, shaping interactions, decisions, and assumptions in real time. Law enforcement, as a public-facing institution, was often a reflection of these societal biases. Studies had repeatedly shown that Black Americans were disproportionately stopped, questioned, and subjected to suspicion, frequently without cause. Prejudice could manifest in subtle behaviors, a scrutinizing gaze, an unnecessary frisk, or, as in Monique's case, a financial demand disguised as friendly persuasion. The patterns were consistent: judgment based on appearance, race, and assumptions rather than fact. Stereotypes reinforced these biases. Media portrayals, cultural narratives, and historical misconceptions perpetuated the idea that Black individuals, particularly Black women in positions of influence, were anomalies, outsiders, or threats. A Black mother driving her children in a well-maintained car might be assumed reckless, suspicious, or deceptive simply because of societal conditioning. These biases often intersected with economic assumptions, gender norms, and generational perceptions, creating a complex web of prejudice that could trap even the most accomplished and careful citizens. Yet Monique's experience also highlighted resilience and the power of challenging these narratives. Each act of calm defiance, measured response, and assertion of rights was a subtle confrontation with centuries of misconception. By maintaining composure, protecting her children, and asserting her integrity, she illustrated how personal strength and knowledge could disrupt the cycle of bias, even if only temporarily. The scene on that street corner, with the flashing lights, murmuring crowd, and officers assuming control, was a microcosm of these broader historical and social dynamics. It reflected both the persistent injustices faced by Black Americans and the quiet but formidable resistance that individuals like Monique could wield. Her experience was a reminder that systemic prejudice was pervasive but not unassailable, and that dignity, intelligence, and patience could serve as tools to navigate, challenge, and ultimately transform deeply entrenched social assumptions. Monique's situation was not unique. It echoed statistics and testimonies that revealed deep-rooted inequality in American society. According to multiple studies, black drivers are disproportionately stopped by police, often without cause. The Stanford Open Policing Project reported that black drivers are stopped 20–30% more frequently than white drivers, and searches conducted on them are less likely to yield contraband, highlighting the role of bias rather than objective reasoning. These numbers were not just statistics, they represented real people, mothers, fathers, and children, subjected to assumptions and mistreatment simply because of skin color. Civil rights advocates had long pointed out that the combination of race, gender, and socioeconomic status compounded vulnerability. Michelle Alexander in The New Jim Crow wrote, "Mass incarceration, racial profiling, and police discrimination are not accidental. They are part of a system designed to enforce social hierarchies." Monique's encounter with the officers was a vivid example. A black mother, professionally accomplished yet still presumed guilty, coerced into a public spectacle of authority and humiliation. The system did not see her qualifications, her intelligence, or her role as a mother. It saw a target. Historical patterns reinforced this inequality. From the era of Jim Crow laws to contemporary policies, black Americans have repeatedly been subjected to unfair scrutiny, unequal treatment, and extrajudicial judgments. Even the act of daily navigation, driving, shopping, or walking through neighborhoods, could trigger encounters rooted in prejudice rather than behavior. Monique's experience on that street was a modern reflection of centuries-old stereotypes: the assumption that blackness equates to wrongdoing, the presumption that authority is undeserved, and the systemic disbelief in competence. Beyond statistics, personal testimonies amplified the truth. Black women, in particular, often reported being subjected to excessive policing, public humiliation, and coercion. Author Tarana Burke, founder of the Me Too movement, noted, "Black women face layers of oppression that are rarely recognized. Their voices are often silenced, their experiences dismissed, and their dignity challenged in ways most cannot imagine." Monique's calm refusal to comply with the bribe and her insistence on integrity directly confronted these dynamics, embodying resistance to a system predisposed to prejudice. The juxtaposition was striking. While the officers relied on assumptions, Monique relied on law, preparation, and moral authority. Her presence served as a living rebuttal to the stereotypes that informed their actions, a testament that knowledge, patience, and integrity could counteract injustice even in a moment of acute danger. These facts and reflections illustrated the broader truth. Prejudice and systemic inequality were persistent forces in society, but courage, dignity, and legal awareness could challenge them. Monique's encounter was both ordinary and extraordinary, a single moment on a street corner that revealed centuries of injustice, while foreshadowing a powerful reversal where authority, skill, and humanity would triumph over bias and false assumptions. As the scene unfolded on the sunlit street, the murmurs of the crowd began to shift subtly. At first, their expressions were dominated by curiosity and judgment, shaped by assumptions and bias. But gradually, the humanity of the moment pierced through their preconceived notions. The sight of a mother, impeccably dressed yet handcuffed, shielding her children from fear and humiliation, struck a chord in those who paused to truly see. Her calm composure, her protective gestures, and the small hands of her children gripping one another evoked a sense of shared vulnerability that transcended race, profession, and status. Some bystanders whispered to each other, their voices tinged with recognition and sympathy. "Look at how composed she is. Even her kids are so scared," one said softly. Others lowered their phones, no longer capturing the moment for spectacle, but observing with genuine concern. The empathy grew from the small details: a gentle hand on the daughter's shoulder, a reassuring nod to her son, a quiet assurance that, despite the officer's intimidation, she remained present and unbroken. These gestures humanized her, converting the crowd's curiosity into a deeper emotional engagement. Monique's silence was powerful. She did not shout or demand attention. Instead, her quiet dignity communicated a strength that words could not fully capture. The public began to understand the stakes, not just for her but for anyone who could face prejudice or unjust treatment. Witnessing her calm endurance, the crowd felt the weight of injustice alongside her. Mothers recognized the fear of seeing children caught in the middle of adult conflicts. Fathers felt the frustration of powerless observation. Young adults sensed the impact of systemic bias they had been learning about in theory. The children's visible anxiety amplified the emotional connection. Their small bodies leaned into their mothers, seeking comfort, and in return, Monique radiated reassurance. Observers felt the protective instinct, the deep love that drove her composure, and the courage required to maintain dignity in the face of coercion and prejudice. The humanity of the moment, mother, children, and the quiet struggle against injustice, became impossible to ignore. Even those initially judgmental softened, questioning the assumptions that had guided their first impressions. The empathy was subtle, but pervasive. It was in the nods of understanding, the lowered gazes, the whispered acknowledgement of courage. Monique's presence illuminated a truth that challenged the crowd's expectations. Authority, competence, and moral strength do not always conform to stereotypes. They can appear quietly, even in handcuffs, revealing themselves through resilience, love, and unyielding dignity. In that shared recognition, the stage was set for a turning point. The audience, emotionally invested, could feel the impending revelation, the reversal of assumptions and the undeniable proof that Monique's strength, intelligence, and humanity extended far beyond what appearances suggested. The moment of empathy created a bridge between public perception and reality, preparing witnesses for a revelation that would leave an indelible impact on everyone present. As the officers continued their posturing, Monique's composure remained unwavering, but beneath the surface, subtle hints of her authority began to emerge. A passerby noticed the way she referenced legal procedures with exact precision, casually correcting an officer's terminology without a hint of arrogance. She spoke of rights, of jurisdiction, of lawful conduct, phrases and concepts that were far beyond the comprehension of most onlookers. To those paying attention, it was the first glimpse that this was no ordinary driver. There was expertise, education, and experience behind every word. Her calm, deliberate explanations revealed a deep understanding of the law. When the officers mentioned vehicle registration and traffic regulations, Monique responded with clarity, citing specific statutes and precedents. "As you can see, officer," she said, her tone gentle but firm, "all documentation is current and compliant with state law. There is no legal basis for confiscation or coercion." The specificity of her language, her effortless command of legal nuance, planted seeds of doubt among the more observant bystanders. Monique's poise and articulation were a stark contrast to the officer's crude assumptions. Each time she spoke, she revealed an intelligence and authority that could not be ignored. Subtle gestures, a confident stance, steady eye contact, an unshakable tone underscored the idea that she was accustomed to influence and negotiation, though it had never been flaunted in public. She demonstrated mastery not just of legal theory, but of practical application, combining knowledge with situational awareness to maintain control of a situation designed to humiliate her. Flashes of her past victories surfaced in her demeanor. Those who knew her reputation could imagine her in the courtroom, dismantling weak arguments, exposing lies, and advocating for justice with precision. Even to strangers, her quiet references and confident speech hinted at a professional life defined by competence, skill, and respect. Every subtle correction, every poised response was a breadcrumb trail, leading the crowd toward understanding that she wielded power and influence far beyond the immediate context. Her children, witnessing their mother's authority, began to sense the weight of her capability. Their fear lessened slightly as they observed the confidence and knowledge guiding her words. The public, too, slowly began to adjust their perception. The whispers shifted from speculation about guilt to murmurs of curiosity. Who is she really? She knows exactly what she's talking about. The street, once dominated by assumptions and prejudice, now carried the first hints of revelation. Even the officers, still attempting to assert dominance, felt the subtle shift. They recognized subconsciously that they were no longer entirely in control. Monique's professional competence, revealed gradually through her language, posture, and demeanor, was quietly rewriting the narrative. A narrative that would soon culminate in a moment no one on that street could have predicted. As Monique stood on the street, her mind momentarily drifted from the tense present to the journey that had shaped her. She remembered the long nights in law school, poring over casebooks while dorm lights dimmed and the city slept outside. The hours were grueling, the material complex, and the environment competitive. Yet, from the very beginning, she had carried a quiet determination, a conviction that her voice, intellect, and ambition were worth every sacrifice. Late nights turned into early mornings, exams became milestones, and each small victory reinforced her confidence in the life she was building for herself and the children she would one day raise. She recalled the exhilaration of passing the bar exam, the culmination of years of relentless study and focus. Her success was not just personal. It represented a triumph over the systemic barriers that had often questioned the potential of a black woman in the legal profession. Monique had faced skepticism from classmates, professors, and even colleagues, subtle and overt, yet she had navigated each challenge with grace and intelligence. Those experiences forged resilience, teaching her that every obstacle could be met with patience, preparation, and unwavering self-respect. Her memories then shifted to her marriage, a chapter filled with hope, partnership, and love, yet ultimately marked by incompatibility and separation. The dissolution of the marriage had been painful, but it revealed another layer of her strength, the capacity to move forward with dignity and purpose. Becoming a single mother brought new responsibilities, demanding that she balance professional ambitions with the care and protection of her children. The daily routines of breakfast, school preparation, and bedtime stories were just as critical as her courtroom victories, forming the foundation of a household grounded in love, respect, and resilience. She pictured her daughter, 8 years old, curious and bright-eyed, and her son, 10, cautious yet perceptive. They had witnessed challenges she would never fully shield them from, yet she had guided them with patience and steady confidence. Every lesson she imparted, from integrity to courage, was reinforced by her own example. Through hardship and triumph, Monique had cultivated a life in which her identity as a mother, professional, and citizen intertwined seamlessly, demonstrating that her achievements were both personal and societal. Even in the midst of the police confrontation, these memories gave her strength. The years of study, the sacrifices, and the careful navigation of a complex world had prepared her for moments like this. Each flashback served as a reminder that her authority, knowledge, and dignity were deeply rooted, impervious to superficial judgments. The street, the officers, the whispering crowd, they were merely a stage where the lessons of her past would soon reveal their full significance. Her history was not just background. It was the foundation of the power and presence she now wielded, silently demanding recognition and respect. Even as the officers barked orders and the crowd whispered assumptions, Monique's posture remained unwavering. There was a quiet confidence in the tilt of her chin, in the measured cadence of her voice, and in the way she positioned herself between her children and the flashing patrol lights. To the casual observer, these details might seem trivial, but to anyone attuned to subtle displays of authority, they were unmistakable signals. This was a woman who had mastered control over chaos, a professional whose presence demanded recognition even when unacknowledged. Each interaction with the officers carried a small but significant assertion of power. When questioned about her compliance, she responded with precise, calm statements, never betraying fear or uncertainty. When a passerby questioned whether she had done something wrong, she offered a polite yet firm acknowledgement of her rights. These small victories, subtle but cumulative, began to shift the energy of the scene. Observers could sense that she was not merely a passive participant. She was guiding the narrative in ways the officers had yet to perceive. Her children, though visibly anxious, also became unwitting indicators of her latent strength. In their reliance on her, the public could see her influence. The way they mirrored her calm, tentative yet trusting posture suggested that Monique's authority extended beyond herself. It shaped the environment around her. Even small acts, like adjusting a child's jacket or whispering reassurance, signaled composure under pressure, hinting that the situation was not as dire as it appeared. Moments from her professional life surfaced in fleeting recollections. A case won with meticulous preparation, a courtroom argument that silenced opposition, a negotiation where her calm rationality turned the tide. These flashes underscored that she was accustomed to influence and triumph, often in spaces where assumptions worked against her. While the officers remained focused on superficial cues, these glimpses of expertise, conveyed through poise, language, and timing, foreshadowed the larger revelation awaiting the crowd. Even the crowd began to notice these subtleties. Whispers shifted from speculation about wrongdoing to curiosity about her identity and competence. Observers who initially assumed guilt now questioned their assumptions, sensing that the apparent imbalance of power was an illusion. The energy of the street, the quiet resilience of Monique, and the subtle cues of authority all combined to suggest that something extraordinary was about to unfold, something that would challenge every preconception and demand acknowledgement of her true stature. In that moment, the foreshadowing was palpable, but invisible to those untrained to recognize it. Each small act, measured response, unwavering gaze, protective gesture, hinted at a revelation that would soon transform humiliation into vindication, prejudice into acknowledgement, and doubt into awe. The stage was set, the audience attentive, and the signals unmistakable. Monique's authority, experience, and courage were about to manifest in a way that no one present would soon forget. The morning sunlight reflected off the polished hoods of the patrol cars, yet it did little to ease the tension thickening the air. Monique remained calm, but the officers' behavior grew increasingly brazen, their attempts at coercion escalating with each passing moment. "You know, ma'am," one officer said, leaning closer with a faint smirk, "we could make things inconvenient if you don't cooperate. Your children might not appreciate a long stay in the station." The words were carefully chosen, a veiled threat wrapped in feigned civility, intended to pressure her into submission. Monique's jaw tightened imperceptibly, her eyes steady. She recognized the strategy: intimidation, subtle manipulation, and the expectation that fear would override reason. Yet she refused to yield. "My children are under my care," she replied evenly, "and I will not be coerced by threats or prejudice." Her tone was calm, but it carried an unshakable authority, a signal that she understood the stakes and would navigate them with precision. The officers exchanged quick glances, frustration flickering across their faces. They attempted to shift tactics, now focusing on financial leverage. $500, one hissed, "and you can continue your day. Refuse and we'll make this difficult for you." Monique shook her head slowly, her expression composed. "I will not pay. I will not be intimidated. You are violating my rights and acting on assumptions, not facts." The public around them murmured, some in astonishment, others in support, but the officers persisted, escalating the tension by invading personal space, raising voices and gesturing aggressively. Every moment became a test of endurance. Monique's children looked up at her wide-eyed, and she responded with a subtle squeeze of the hand and a reassuring smile. Her actions communicated resilience, confidence, and protection, silently instructing them to remain calm despite the officers' provocations. Each attempt at humiliation, coercion, or fear-mongering met the same measured response: refusal to engage in panic, refusal to accept prejudice as truth, and refusal to let intimidation dictate the outcome. Even as the officers pressed harder, subtle cracks began to appear in their facade. The calm authority Monique exuded unsettled them, their earlier certainty replaced by fleeting doubt. They could not fully anticipate the depth of her knowledge, the extent of her professional influence, or the way her composed defiance would soon invert the power dynamic. The chant of coercion, threats, and whispered warnings collided with a silent yet undeniable force: the presence of a woman whose authority, patience, and intellect far exceeded the assumptions they had made based on appearances alone. The tension reached a boiling point. Passers-by held their breaths, sensing that a pivotal moment was approaching. The officers' aggression and the crowd's curiosity merged into a pressure cooker atmosphere, and Monique stood at its center, unwavering. Every glance, every gesture, every measured word foreshadowed the imminent revelation that the woman they attempted to intimidate was far more powerful than anyone could have imagined, and that justice, patience, and integrity would soon assert themselves in the face of prejudice and corruption. The crowd on the sidewalk grew larger, drawn in by the escalating drama and the glaring presence of flashing patrol lights. Some onlookers whispered with judgment, others stared openly, their expressions betraying assumptions shaped by bias. "She must have done something wrong," one muttered, barely audible over the tension. Another added, "Look at her kids. How could she let this happen?" The comments were layered with prejudice, a mixture of curiosity and condescension, highlighting the societal readiness to judge without facts. Monique could hear the murmurs, though she refused to let them penetrate her composure. Every glance from a passerby, every half-whispered accusation felt like a weight pressing down on her shoulders. The officers capitalized on this, their smirks and subtle nods toward the crowd reinforcing the spectacle. They seemed to thrive on the societal assumptions swirling around them, creating a theater of humiliation where Monique, a successful professional and mother, was reduced to a target of public curiosity and implicit bias. Her children sat quietly beside her, their small faces etched with fear and confusion. Observers who might have been sympathetic were now forced to confront the discomfort of witnessing innocence caught in the crossfire of prejudice and power. A few onlookers shook their heads, murmuring that the officers must be right, yet others began to notice inconsistencies, the lack of cause, the unwarranted aggression, the apparent dignity of the woman being harassed. Slowly, empathy began to creep in among some spectators, but the dominant impression remained one of public shaming. Monique's composure was her shield. She held her head high, maintaining a calm, steady gaze that silently challenged every whisper, every sneer, and every assumption. Her actions subtly contradicted the narrative the crowd had been fed. She was not guilty, she was not reckless, and she was far more capable and authoritative than anyone they could imagine. The juxtaposition of her calm dignity against the public humiliation imposed by officers and social bias intensified the drama, making her strength and integrity increasingly apparent. The officers, sensing the tension in the crowd, pushed further, heightening the spectacle. "Stand still," one commanded sharply, clearly aware that the eyes of the public lent power to their actions. But every act intended to humiliate her only reinforced the subtle message she projected, that authority and respect were earned through knowledge, patience, and moral strength, not by appearance or superficial judgment. Even as the murmurs continued, the seeds of doubt had been planted. Some began to question the assumptions they had made, recognizing that the humiliation Monique endured was not a reflection of her character, but of societal prejudice and systemic bias. Each judgmental glance, each whispered comment, only amplified the contrast between what the world expected and the truth that would soon be revealed, a truth that would dismantle every assumption in the minds of the onlookers and officers alike. Amid the flashing lights and the murmurs of the crowd, Monique's composure remained unshaken. Every step she took, every gesture she made, was deliberate, controlled, and precise. While the officers attempted to project authority through volume, aggression, and intimidation, she radiated a quiet, unyielding power that required no dramatics. Her head remained held high, her posture firm yet approachable, and her voice calm, carrying clarity and conviction with each word. The contrast between her poised presence and the officer's bluster was striking, a visual and emotional declaration that true authority did not need to be forced. It was inherent. The public, initially eager to judge, began to notice the subtle yet undeniable difference. While the officers fumbled with their attempts at coercion, issuing orders without legal grounding, Monique responded with composed, reasoned statements that revealed knowledge far beyond what they expected. "You are assuming wrongdoing where none exists," she said, her tone measured and unwavering. "All documentation is current, and my rights are protected under the law." Each sentence was precise, revealing intelligence and professional expertise without ever raising her voice in anger. Her children, still seated beside her, mirrored her calm, reassured by the silent signals of strength and protection. Observers could see it, the way she shielded them with both body and demeanor, transforming what could have been fear into a demonstration of dignity. The officers, in contrast, relied on intimidation, verbal aggression, and physical posturing to assert dominance. The difference was stark. One side wielded coercion, the other commanded respect. Even as whispers from the crowd continued, they now carried a different tone. Some began to question their own assumptions. The way Monique navigated the situation, the calm assurance, the unwavering stance, the measured rebuttals, conveyed competence and authority that defied the biases that had initially guided perception. She was teaching a lesson without words, demonstrating that dignity and intellect could withstand scrutiny, prejudice, and public humiliation. The officers' frustration grew as Monique remained unshaken. Their attempts to provoke, to manipulate, and to coerce her met with calm resistance, highlighting their reliance on intimidation rather than substance. Her control of the situation was not just personal, it was symbolic. It revealed the folly of assumptions based on appearance, skin color, or societal bias, emphasizing that true authority was rooted in knowledge, integrity, and composure. In that tense street moment, the contrast between Monique and those who sought to judge her crystallized. She was a beacon of patience, intelligence, and unwavering dignity, a living testament that appearances could deceive and that the assumptions of the uninformed carried no weight against truth and competence. The stage was now set for the inevitable revelation, one that would expose the disparity between superficial judgment and real authority, leaving a lasting impression on all who witnessed it. As the tension on the street continued, Monique subtly began to reveal fragments of her authority, pieces that would slowly reshape the perception of everyone present. She shifted slightly in her seat, retrieving a neatly organized folder from her briefcase. The papers were not just ordinary documents. They contained meticulous records, licenses, and certifications that reflected a career built on precision, diligence, and professional recognition. Though she made no grand display, the act of producing these documents conveyed an undeniable message. She was prepared, educated, and operating from a position of legitimate power. Her movements were deliberate. She handed a copy of her license to one of the officers, her gaze steady. "This verifies my credentials," she said, calm but firm. "I am fully compliant with all legal requirements, and any attempt to coerce or intimidate is unlawful." The officers exchanged uncertain glances, the first cracks in their facade appearing as they registered the legitimacy of her documentation and the unshakable confidence behind it. To the crowd, these were subtle yet potent signals. This was no ordinary encounter. The balance of authority was quietly but unmistakably shifting. Monique's posture reinforced the message. Every gesture, from the slight lift of her chin to the controlled placement of her hands on the folder, radiated confidence and control. She spoke in measured tones, articulating her rights and responsibilities with clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. The way she carried herself contrasted sharply with the officers' reliance on force and assumption. While they attempted to assert dominance through volume and intimidation, Monique demonstrated that true power lay in knowledge, preparation, and the calm application of authority. Even small details conveyed her position. The folder, neatly arranged and clearly labeled, suggested meticulous organization and experience handling complex matters. Her unwavering eye contact communicated assurance and command. These subtle cues, seemingly minor, created a ripple effect among observers. The crowd began to reconsider their initial judgments, and the officers found themselves confronting someone whose competence they had underestimated. Monique's children, observing their mother's calm demeanor, sensed the shift as well. Their fear began to ease, replaced by quiet admiration and trust. The public, witnessing this transformation, started to grasp that appearances were deceiving, that the woman they had assumed vulnerable was actually the embodiment of authority, knowledge, and moral strength. In these moments, the stage was set for the revelation that would follow. The small deliberate gestures, producing credentials, maintaining composure, and asserting rights, were not just acts of defense. They were breadcrumbs leading to the ultimate disclosure of her professional stature. Each action subtly dismantled the assumptions of the officers and the crowd, proving that true authority does not need to be proclaimed loudly. It is recognized through competence, poise, and unwavering confidence. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, but a subtle shift had begun. Among the onlookers, some recognized elements they could not immediately place. A colleague who had once shared a case with Monique spotted the measured way she handled the officers and the precise references to law, and a flicker of recognition crossed their face. "Could it be?" they whispered, barely audible over the surrounding tension. Others in the crowd, observing her calm confidence, began to speculate in hushed tones, their curiosity deepening as inconsistencies in the officers' accusations became increasingly apparent. Even from a distance, passers-by noted details that hinted at her significance. Her posture unwavering in the face of intimidation, the subtle, firm hand movements when presenting documents, the calm, articulate explanations, all were signs of experience and authority that could not be overlooked. Some onlookers exchanged glances, quietly questioning the assumptions that had initially guided their judgment. The whispered conversations began to carry a tone of intrigue, as if the audience collectively sensed that there was more to this encounter than met the eye. Monique's children also became unwitting participants in the creation of suspense. Their nervous glances toward their mother, coupled with her subtle gestures of reassurance, drew empathy from those around. Observers could sense the bond and the quiet strength that radiated from their interactions. It was a humanizing element that added layers to the unfolding drama. Here was a professional woman of authority, but also a mother whose protectiveness and composure hinted at the stakes far beyond the immediate confrontation. Colleagues and acquaintances who recognized her began to whisper in disbelief. "I've never seen her handled like this. She's one of the most respected attorneys in the city," one murmured. Their reactions were a mixture of admiration, concern, and confusion, amplifying the sense of mystery. The crowd, picking up on these reactions, began to shift from judgment to curiosity, trying to reconcile the discrepancy between what they saw, a woman seemingly vulnerable in handcuffs, and what they now suspected about her background and competence. The officers, unaware of the growing recognition among observers, continued their attempt at intimidation. Yet with each subtle display of authority from Monique, the surrounding audience became increasingly alert to the possibility that the narrative was about to flip. Each whisper, each glance of recognition, and each shared look of curiosity added layers of suspense. The public, colleagues, and passers-by were all participating in a silent countdown, sensing that a revelation was imminent, one that would not only vindicate Monique, but also expose the prejudices and assumptions of those who had misjudged her. In this heightened atmosphere, the tension was no longer solely between Monique and the officers. It had expanded to include the crowd itself, whose attention and speculation intensified the drama. Every small acknowledgement, every questioning look, amplified the anticipation, preparing the stage for a revelation that would turn assumptions upside down and redefine everyone's understanding of authority, competence, and justice. The street had become a stage, charged with anticipation and held in collective suspense. Every whisper, every shifting footstep, and every flashing patrol light contributed to a tension so thick it felt almost tangible. Monique remained calm, yet internally she felt the weight of the moment, the culmination of fear, judgment, and the expectation of the crowd. Onlookers leaned forward, some holding their breath, as if mere observation could influence the outcome. Every pair of eyes in the crowd was focused, waiting for the resolution that could restore fairness or further entrench injustice. The officers, still attempting to assert authority, grew visibly uneasy under the intensity of the public gaze. Their earlier confidence began to waver, as small, subtle indicators of Monique's competence and composure rippled through the crowd. They were surrounded not just by witnesses, but by observers beginning to question every move they made. Murmurs of doubt spread like wildfire. Some people whispered about her evident knowledge of the law, others speculated about her professional standing, and a few recognized the meticulous calm that only a highly skilled attorney could maintain under pressure. Monique's children clung to her sides, sensing the tension, yet drawing quiet reassurance from her presence. Their eyes reflected a mixture of fear, hope, and admiration as they watched their mother navigate the standoff. In their innocence, they felt the suspense of the public drama unfolding before them. The crowd, too, was captivated by the duality of the moment. Here was a woman seemingly vulnerable, yet radiating an unshakable authority, poised to reveal a truth that would upend assumptions. Each second stretched, punctuated by the officer's attempts at control and Monique's deliberate, measured responses. She maintained unwavering eye contact, her calm breathing and steady stance communicating confidence far beyond words. The public's attention intensified, sensing that the narrative was about to pivot. Murmurs shifted from judgment to speculation, curiosity replacing condescension. Every detail, the tilt of her chin, the careful organization of her documents, the subtle gestures toward her children, hinted at a story far more significant than anyone could yet comprehend. In that charged moment, the tension reached its peak. The audience, both near and far, collectively held its breath, waiting for the revelation that would determine whether justice, competence, and truth would be recognized, or whether prejudice and intimidation would prevail. The street, once ordinary, had transformed into a theater of suspense, morality, and human resilience. Every observer sensed that the culmination of this confrontation was imminent, and that the unfolding revelation would not only vindicate Monique, but also force the world watching to confront their own assumptions and biases. The officer's confident posturing began to falter the moment Monique picked up her phone with calm precision. She dialed a number she had memorized long ago, one reserved for moments when authority and legality demanded recognition beyond personal assertion. Within seconds, a composed voice answered on the other end, her connection to the highest echelons of the legal profession in the United States. "This is Monique Harris. I'm currently being detained unjustly during a traffic stop with my children. "I need immediate verification and intervention from your office," she said, her tone unwavering, professional, and commanding. Within minutes, the presence of someone representing the apex of legal authority transformed the atmosphere. The officers, once so brazen and unyielding, froze as a senior official arrived on the scene, reviewing the situation with swift, precise attention. "Release the woman immediately," the representative instructed, voice firm and authoritative. "She is fully compliant with all regulations, and any coercion or intimidation you attempted constitutes misconduct. You are hereby ordered to stand down and cooperate." The sudden arrival of this legal authority stunned the officers. Their earlier confidence, built on assumptions, prejudice, and intimidation, evaporated in an instant. Their attempts to control the situation had been effortlessly neutralized by Monique's connections, expertise, and foresight. The reality of her professional stature, which had only been hinted at through subtle gestures, documents, and demeanor, now became undeniable. The entire street could see the disparity between the officer's perception and the truth. Monique was not a suspect, not a statistic, but one of the most respected attorneys in the nation, with direct lines to the top of the legal hierarchy. The crowd, witnessing the sudden shift, gasped collectively. Whispers that had once questioned her culpability now transformed into astonishment and respect. She's not just any lawyer," one onlooker murmured. "She's someone they answer to." Even the children, previously anxious and fearful, began to relax, sensing their mother's authority was absolute, recognized by the highest levels of legal oversight. Monique's calm and measured demeanor remained intact, a stark contrast to the officer's flustered state. She allowed the interaction to unfold without raising her voice, demonstrating that true power required neither aggression nor spectacle. It was recognized through competence, preparation, and the respect of peers. The street had shifted from a theater of public humiliation to one of revelation and vindication. The officers, the crowd, and even passers-by were now acutely aware of the stakes, the depth of her influence, and the magnitude of their misjudgment. In that moment, the lesson was clear. Assumptions, prejudice, and superficial judgments crumble when confronted with authority grounded in knowledge, integrity, and unwavering composure. Monique's professional credibility, previously hidden beneath the veneer of everyday life, had been revealed in full, transforming fear and humiliation into acknowledgement, respect, and a resounding affirmation of justice. Once inside the station, the atmosphere shifted completely. The officers who had moments ago exuded confidence and control now moved with caution, aware of the formal authority overseeing the situation. Monique remained composed, walking steadily beside her children, her presence commanding attention without a word. Every step she took conveyed professionalism, authority, and the quiet assurance of someone accustomed to respect, earned through achievement rather than intimidation. Documents were reviewed meticulously. Licenses, certifications, and legal credentials were presented in a clear, organized manner. Each page reflected years of study, dedication, and service to the law. As the senior official and station personnel examined the paperwork, the officers' earlier posturing appeared absurd. The contrast between their assumptions and the reality of Monique's professional standing became increasingly apparent. Her meticulous preparation and the official recognition of her credentials left no room for misunderstanding. She was entirely in the right, and their actions constituted a serious breach of conduct. The senior legal authority spoke firmly, addressing the officers and the station staff. "This woman is a licensed attorney of national recognition. Her conduct is exemplary, and any attempts at coercion, intimidation, or discrimination are unacceptable and will be addressed immediately." The officers nodded nervously, understanding the weight of the words and the presence of institutional authority. They were no longer in control. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Monique's calm demeanor, reinforced by her documents and the official backing, served as a living demonstration of respect earned through competence. Her children observed silently, learning firsthand the impact of integrity and authority in action. Every movement, from the placement of the documents to her measured tone in conversation, conveyed mastery of both the law and the social dynamics surrounding it. This was not just about vindication. It was a lesson in presence, poise, and the quiet power of earned respect. Colleagues and onlookers who had arrived or witnessed the scene began to express their admiration discreetly. The initial tension and humiliation had transformed into acknowledgement and validation. Monique's professional stature was no longer a hidden aspect of her identity. It had been revealed through evidence, recognition, and demeanor. The station itself, once a symbol of potential threat, had become a stage where competence, preparation, and authority reasserted their rightful place. The moment was profound. Every observer, every officer, and even her children were witnesses to a clear demonstration. Authority is not taken by force. It is recognized through preparation, integrity, and unwavering confidence. Monique's presence, documents, and official acknowledgement combined to create an undeniable portrait of professional power and societal respect. In that room, the story of injustice met the undeniable force of truth, and the recognition of Monique's authority left an indelible impression on all who experienced it firsthand. The street outside the station, once filled with judgmental whispers and skeptical glances, had transformed into a theater of astonishment and reflection. The revelation of Monique's authority, the fact that the woman they had assumed guilty and intimidated was in reality one of the nation's most respected attorneys, swept through the crowd like an unexpected wave. The irony was palpable. Those who had sought to humiliate her, to exploit her perceived vulnerability, were now confronted with the full weight of her professional and moral stature. Observers exchanged glances, some incredulous, others quietly chastened by the realization of how quickly assumptions had misled them. The officers, their previous bravado replaced by muted acknowledgement and discomfort, now had to confront not only their own errors, but the societal biases that had guided their behavior. It was a moment heavy with irony. In attempting to assert control through prejudice and intimidation, they had revealed their ignorance and the fragility of authority based solely on appearance. Monique's children, witnessing their mother's composed triumph, absorbed lessons of resilience, integrity, and the power of standing firm against injustice. The crowd, too, was forced into reflection. Every whispered assumption, every judgment based on skin color or superficial cues, had been dismantled by the undeniable evidence of competence, character, and authority. It was a stark reminder of the pervasiveness of bias and the consequences of allowing prejudice to guide perception and action. Even casual onlookers, who had arrived merely to observe a routine police interaction, found themselves reconsidering societal norms and personal assumptions. They had seen a mother and professional humiliated, coerced, and misjudged, and then witnessed the full reversal of that dynamic when the truth emerged. The juxtaposition was striking. Humiliation transformed into respect, fear into admiration, and ignorance into acknowledgement. Monique, calm and composed throughout, allowed the irony to speak for itself. She did not gloat, nor did she need to assert dominance aggressively. The contrast between the officer's initial assumptions and the ultimate revelation was a powerful commentary on systemic bias and the enduring strength of professionalism, preparation, and moral courage. Each observer, from curious bystanders to seasoned colleagues, absorbed a lesson about fairness, justice, and the human tendency to judge hastily. In that singular moment, the street became a microcosm of society at large. The reversal of expectations highlighted both the fragility of prejudiced judgment and the enduring strength of truth. Monique's calm resilience, her preparedness, and her authority had turned a moment of potential injustice into a testament to integrity, patience, and social reflection. The crowd left with more than astonishment. They carried a renewed awareness of how appearances deceive, how assumptions mislead, and how dignity and competence command respect, even in the face of bias. As Monique stood outside the station, her children by her side, the adrenaline of the confrontation began to settle into a reflective calm. The streets that had moments ago been charged with tension, judgment, and uncertainty now seemed quiet, almost surreal. She inhaled deeply, allowing herself a pause, a moment to acknowledge both the weight of what had occurred and the lessons it carried. The anger she had felt when confronted by prejudice and coercion transformed into clarity, patience, and resolve. Monique reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point, the years of rigorous study, the countless late nights in law school, the challenges of balancing motherhood and a demanding career, and the quiet, relentless perseverance required to excel in a world often reluctant to recognize her worth. Every moment of adversity had been a preparation for today, a lesson in resilience and composure. She recognized that indignation, when guided by principle and clarity, could be a powerful catalyst for growth and learning. Her children looked up at her with admiration, unaware of the full complexity of the moment, but intuitively understanding that their mother had faced and overcome a formidable challenge. In their eyes, Monique saw the embodiment of strength, integrity, and the transformative power of patience. It was a reminder that the values she instilled were as important as the professional victories she achieved, lessons of dignity, fairness, and courage that would shape the next generation. The societal reflection was equally instructive. Monique considered the assumptions made by the officers, the crowd, and even casual observers. Biases, ignorance, and systemic prejudice had colored their perceptions, creating a moment of conflict that, while unjust, provided a powerful opportunity for insight. Rather than succumbing to frustration, she transformed her indignation into a deliberate teaching moment, not through confrontation but through presence, composure, and the undeniable assertion of competence and authority. This reflection reminded Monique of a broader truth. Patience and clarity, when combined with knowledge and integrity, are forces that outlast anger and prejudice. The humiliation she endured, the challenge to her authority, and the assumptions of those around her had all been temporary. Her preparation, her experience, and her unwavering commitment to justice ensured that the outcome would reflect the truth, not the biases of the moment. Standing there, Monique felt a profound sense of empowerment. She had faced injustice with dignity, navigated intimidation with intelligence, and transformed indignation into learning. The experience reaffirmed her belief in the power of resilience, the importance of ethical conduct, and the enduring impact of demonstrating integrity in the face of societal bias. In that quiet reflection, she understood that every challenge she overcame strengthened not only her own resolve, but also her ability to shape the world around her, guiding others toward justice, awareness, and respect. After the storm of tension, humiliation, and revelation, Monique finally exhaled, allowing a moment of relief to settle over her. Her children, previously wide-eyed with fear and uncertainty, now looked up at her with admiration and trust. The atmosphere, once charged with intimidation and bias, had transformed into one of empowerment and security. Monique knelt to meet their gaze, her hands gently resting on their shoulders, and felt the weight of responsibility ease into a shared understanding. They were safe, their dignity preserved, and justice had been affirmed. The youngest, her 8-year-old daughter, clung momentarily to her mother, whispering softly, "Mum, everything's okay now." Monique smiled, her calm demeanor radiating reassurance. "Yes, sweetie," she said, her voice steady yet warm. "We've faced something unfair, but we stood strong and the truth prevailed." Her 10-year-old son, sitting slightly apart but watching intently, nodded in quiet recognition. He understood in his own way that courage, composure, and preparation could transform moments of fear into triumph. For Monique, this was not just a victory in the eyes of the law. It was a deeply personal affirmation. The journey she had taken, from student to accomplished attorney, from mother balancing responsibility to protector of her children, culminated in this shared moment of emotional closure. The street, the crowd, and the officers faded into the background as the focus centered on the family unit, now strengthened by their experience and the visible demonstration of resilience. Empowerment extended beyond mere survival. Monique's children had witnessed firsthand the power of knowledge, patience, and integrity. They saw their mother navigate prejudice, intimidation, and public scrutiny with unwavering poise, and in doing so, she imparted lessons far deeper than legal expertise. They absorbed an understanding of justice, the importance of standing firm in one's principles, and the assurance that dignity and authority could not be undermined by ignorance or bias. The world outside had temporarily judged them, but within this small circle, justice had been restored. Monique allowed herself a brief smile, knowing that the emotional safety of her children was now secured. The day's events had transformed fear into empowerment, humiliation into vindication, and uncertainty into clarity. Her children's eyes reflected relief and a nascent sense of pride, mirroring the quiet satisfaction she felt in knowing that her patience, strategy, and unwavering principles had guided them through adversity. As they left the station together, the sun casting a warm glow over the street, Monique carried not just her own sense of accomplishment, but also the collective triumph of family, fairness, and restored justice. The children held close to her, secure in the knowledge that their mother's strength had protected them, and that integrity, courage, and authority, quiet, deliberate, and steadfast, would always prevail in the face of prejudice. It was a moment that would be remembered, cherished, and carried forward, a testament to resilience, empowerment, and the enduring power of standing for what is right. As the events of the day settled into memory, Monique took a moment to reflect on the broader lessons her experience had imparted. The encounter on that street was more than a personal trial. It had become a powerful narrative about prejudice, justice, and the enduring strength of dignity. Each moment of tension, every whispered assumption, and every unfair judgment had underscored the pervasive biases that still linger in society. Yet, the resolution of the incident offered a compelling counterpoint. Knowledge, preparation, and integrity can overcome even the most deeply entrenched discrimination. Monique's story served as a reminder that prejudice often operates invisibly, shaping assumptions and guiding behavior in ways that are not immediately obvious. It illustrated how appearances can mislead and how society frequently judges individuals based on skin color, socioeconomic status, or perceived vulnerability. By maintaining composure, asserting her rights, and demonstrating her professional authority, Monique not only protected herself and her children, but also highlighted the need for awareness and reflection among those who witness or participate in acts of bias. The moral of the story extended beyond legal expertise. It emphasized the importance of patience in the face of injustice, the value of self-confidence grounded in competence, and the necessity of standing firm against coercion, intimidation, and prejudice. Monique's calm, deliberate actions reminded everyone observing that true authority is not demonstrated through aggression, assumptions, or superficial power. It is recognized through integrity, knowledge, and the consistent application of one's principles. For viewers, the narrative offered both empathy and inspiration. It encouraged reflection on personal biases, the recognition of systemic inequalities, and the understanding that individual actions, when guided by dignity, courage, and fairness, can influence larger social dynamics. Monique's resilience, coupled with her unwavering commitment to justice, demonstrated that confronting prejudice is not merely about personal vindication. It is about affirming universal principles of respect, fairness, and equality. As the story drew to a close, the moment was ripe for engagement and interaction. The audience had witnessed a powerful account of injustice, resilience, and triumph, and the opportunity now existed to connect personally with the narrative. Viewers could reflect on their own experiences, consider how they might respond in similar circumstances, and engage in conversation about prejudice, justice, and the enduring importance of human dignity. Monique's journey, from fear and public humiliation to recognition and empowerment, offered a roadmap for navigating adversity with patience, composure, and unwavering moral clarity. It reinforced the truth that societal biases can be challenged, assumptions overturned, and integrity preserved, provided one approaches injustice with strategy, courage, and an unshakable commitment to principle. The story left a lasting impression, encouraging viewers to internalize its lessons and to consider their own role in fostering a more just and equitable world. Monique's story shows courage, resilience, and the power of integrity in the face of prejudice. Now we want to hear from you. Subscribe to the channel to see more stories that reveal hidden truths, inspire courage, and highlight justice. Like this video, if her strength and composure left an impression, it helps more people discover these stories. Comment below and tell us your thoughts. Have you ever experienced or witnessed injustice? How would you react in a situation like Monique's? Sharing your perspective helps create awareness and inspires others. Share this video with friends and family so her story reaches as many people as possible. Finally, we want to know your rating. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? Did it capture your attention and make you reflect on prejudice, justice, or courage? Your voice completes the story. By engaging, subscribing, liking, commenting, sharing, and rating, you help spread the message that dignity, perseverance, and justice are values worth celebrating. What's your score for Monique's journey 0 to 10?